All right, good afternoon, everybody. I think it's afternoon, slightly. Good morning / almost afternoon. It's delightful to be here today, so I just want to say thank you to Rick and the AIC for the invitation to come. I'm taking a bit of a different slant compared to the previous presentation. It's also good to be after Rutger, so I feel that you just laid the groundwork, foundation, for a lot of, I think, the results and discussion from this. I've been researching fraud for a number of years now. Predominantly, I guess, romance fraud is what a lot of my work has focused on. But today I'm presenting specifically about recruitment fraud. It's certainly an issue, as many of you in the room may know, and presenting some findings from a survey that I did with colleagues. Shout out to my colleagues, Professor Deanna Grant-Smith from University of Sunshine Coast and Professor Tom Holt, who's over in Michigan. Let's go. So in terms of recruitment fraud, there's a lot of different terminology around this space. I prefer to use the term recruitment fraud, but there are many other terms around job scams, around online employment fraud, fake jobs. I've just done a literature search with an RA, and we essentially ended up with a list of probably 10 to 12 different terms that the academic literature encompasses, which is challenging and maybe a different discussion for another day. In terms of recruitment fraud, it usually involves an offender who's advertising or offering a job which does not exist. So the whole aim of this is around extracting money or extracting personal information. So if you think about it, if you're a job seeker, you're motivated, you're looking to find a job, advertisement comes up, you think about how we apply for jobs, we put ourselves out there. So you've got your CV that's got all of your personal information on it, and you are uploading that to an offender in the case of recruitment fraud, and therefore exposing yourself to identity theft, fraud, and a range of other cyber harms that Anthony certainly well captured, probably as a result in some of the survey results from the Australian Cybercrime Survey. So many of the recruitment fraud approaches are task-based schemes for commission, where if victims complete a number of kind of random tasks, that they then believe that they will receive a commission, receive a payment for that. But it also includes money muling and many upfront payment schemes for training purposes, for buying goods and services. There's a whole range of, I guess, different ways, but certainly the task-based commission schemes are the most popular and the most prevalent in this space. And we also know that perpetrators frequently impersonate legitimate businesses. So that adds to the credibility. It adds to, I guess, the attractiveness of the advertisements if they seem to be coming from well-known organisations, businesses that people might want to work for. Just got some statistics up here just to kind of illustrate the problem of recruitment fraud at this point in time, because it doesn't necessarily get the same media attention as other types of fraud. So in 2023, recruitment fraud grew by 151% compared to the previous year. And I mean, granted, all of us in the room know the problem with statistics, the fact that most people don't report, but these stats are taken from ScamWatch, from the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. So in 2022, it was 9.7 million was reported lost, and that jumped to 24.4 in 1 year. So that certainly, I guess, drew attention to this particular problem. It did go down in 2024 to 13 million. But again, we know the challenges in this space. What it has done is, for those of you that are familiar with the National Anti-Scam Centre, they have an approach to targeting different types of fraud in what they term fusion cells. So for me, I think that's just a fancy name for a working group. And the first fusion cell for the National Anti-Scam Centre focused on investment fraud. The second one is currently underway, wrapping up, that I'm part of, and I know there are others that are part of this in this room, and it is focused around job scams. So it's actually been a really beneficial exercise to bring together industry, a range of different industry, police, banks, and to talk about this particular type of crime. The research does indicate that this disproportionately targets younger people, women, culturally, linguistically diverse communities, as well as migrants and students. There are a few studies that say it targets the elderly. But if you think about this, it really does target vulnerable and marginalised communities. And I think that's effective from an offender perspective because, again, if we know the challenges around help seeking, and this is a group that have, I guess, even additional barriers to the ability and perhaps the desire around that help-seeking behaviour. So it creates a lot of additional challenges when we talk about prevention, disruption, support, and what we can do in this space. So what I'm presenting today is a survey that my colleagues and I did around searching for online employment. So one of the challenges that we all know is that you can't just ask people, have you been a victim of fraud? Because they don't recognise it. It does have a huge sense of shame and stigma, and there are many challenges in that. So the way that we framed the survey was just around searching for employment online, and then we asked people about a whole range of different negative experiences that had occurred to them, that had happened to them during those searches for online employment. So we had a number of different modules, and what I'm going to talk about today is the ones that are highlighted around searching for employment, around the actual applying for jobs online, the suffering a loss, and I've got one slide at the end around near misses, because I think what's also important, and this speaks to, again, some of the work that Anthony just presented around some of the, I guess, protective behaviours that people put in place to try and stop this from happening, but also what I've done in some of my other research is capturing these near misses. So it's not just about those that actually, I guess, are victimised, but I think it's really interesting to explore those who kind of get maybe partway through and then something clicks and they realise, well, hang on, this doesn't seem right. So it's kind of capturing at that moment what they're thinking and can we harness and can we capitalise on that? So this is the sample. We used Qualtrics, which is an online survey recruitment provider. There are different challenges with different recruiting platforms. I've used Qualtrics quite a lot. We did try to get a sample that was kind of somewhat representative of demographics within an Australian context, but granted, this is not necessarily going to be a representative sample. So the first question, most of the data I'm presenting today is just descriptive. I've got a lot of tables with highlights on there. I do have a slide in a few slides' time that has some stats to it. That was done by my colleague Tom Holt, so if you fire the tough questions at me for that slide, I may have to kind of take them on notice. But a lot, I think, today is just a descriptive overview of the results, which I think do pose a lot of questions up for discussion. So we asked people the information that were asked as part of the application. And you can see here that the top four I've highlighted are pretty obvious. If you're applying for a job, you need to provide your name, you need to provide your details, you generally need to provide your qualifications and your employment history. So none of that is probably concerning. Things that are a little bit more concerning from my perspective are being asked in an application to provide driver's licence numbers, passport details, other perhaps more sensitive things. This question we asked about the information that people uploaded as part of the application process. And again, with a lot of these things, we can't necessarily say that all of the people that did this were victims of fraud or that this was used for fraud, but I guess it draws our attention to recruitment practices. And if any of you are in charge of recruitment practices within organisations, then I think it prompts an important discussion around the type of information that we routinely collect, that we ask people to give over, and the sense of responsibility that we then have when we own that. So again, there's information up here around qualifications that perhaps doesn't raise any red flags, but having to actually upload birth certificates and driver's licenses as part of an application, so you haven't even made it through to the next round yet. This is just I've seen the ad online in most circumstances and I am applying for this job. And as part of that, I'm uploading, for some people, some really sensitive pieces of information. And then there was a third of the sample who were not required to upload photocopies or scans of anything at the beginning. We did have a number of people who were asked for money upfront to pay an upfront fee to apply for the job. And out of those 156 people, 142 of them actually did pay the fee that was asked of them. So this is probably where I'm more confident saying that this is a group of victims who in most circumstances have probably paid for a job that didn't exist or paid a fee to apply for a job that doesn't exist. Most of the sample paid $100 or less, so again, it's not huge amounts of money, but it is kind of when we think about that high volume, which again, Rutger talked about this morning. direct bank transfers, people sending direct cash. Again, I think this slide is entirely problematic. Then we asked a broader question just around whether people felt that they had sustained losses through an online job application. And we did have 196, so nearly 200 people in our survey indicate that they had suffered a financial loss or had had their identity stolen in some way as the result of applying for a job. So we can see the breakdown there around people saying that they'd lost money, people saying that they had sustained identity crime, I guess through giving away their information, and another group of people who said that they had a compromise of their data, of their information, but to their knowledge they had no financial loss associated with that. So we are kind of starting to analyse this. This isn't published yet, so this is the first, I can't say you're the first group to see this. I did present this to the Fusion cell that I'm part of. But you're certainly the first kind of broader public audience that's seen this. We are in the process of doing some analysis and writing it up and hopefully getting it out there. So this demonstrates, Tom put together a binary logistic regression to look at particularly, I guess, that financial loss. So the group in our survey that had experienced a financial loss, and he captured a number of different demographics and a number of different online behaviours. So you might, even though I haven't gone through it, at the beginning we had modules around online behaviours, so the amount of time that people spend doing different tasks on different websites, those types of things. So he built a model that looked at this. So there are several risk factors that were significant that are commonly observed with the overall victimisation. So I don't necessarily think we can say, just the design of our survey, we can't say that all of these are fraud victims, but we certainly, I think, can say that there are some correlates here around financial loss, and it does contribute to our broader knowledge around fraud victimisation. And I think what's interesting in some of these is that they are consistent just with fraud victimisation more broadly. And I can certainly say Tom and I have worked in this space for a number of years and looked at a few different types of fraud, and the results that we're getting through are quite consistent regardless of whether it's recruitment fraud or it's data breaches or it's online shopping fraud. There is some consistency there. So more time spent in chat rooms, online shopping and using dating platforms, they were all significant factors around financial losses, and they are three, I guess, factors that are consistent, that do seem to pop up quite often. Decreased time using email and web browsing, so those that spent less time were more likely to lose money. Those identifying as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in the survey were overrepresented in terms of victimisation. And again, this pops up in all of my work, and it's something I would really like to explore a little bit further, but has a number of challenges associated with it. The interesting part at the bottom for both of us, for Tom and I, is that the time spent searching or applying for online jobs wasn't significant. So it wasn't actually those that are spending more time are more likely to be victimised, that there was no relationship there at all. We did ask people in hindsight around the, I guess, potential indicators that perhaps led them to question the site, the job advertisement that they were applying for. And we can see here that there are some, I guess, fairly obvious ones where people were a bit suspicious about the website. They were suspicious about some aspect of the advertisement. We can see here that being asked to send through a payment and being asked to upload personal information for some people did flag as something that was a bit uncomfortable and potentially, I guess, fraudulent. So these are the things I guess we need to think about in terms of some of our prevention messaging and what we can harness. We asked people about how they found the job advertisement that they'd applied for, and most people were doing their own internet searches. So again, if we recognise the amount of fraudulent advertising that's out there, there are so many different circumstances where we do an online search, the first hit sometimes can be a fraudulent advertisement or something that isn't legitimate. And these are, I guess this is what people are confronted with when they're doing online job searches. We asked around reporting, and I guess mirroring the survey results from the Australian Cybercrime Survey, a very small percentage of people actually reported, and the highest category, I guess, person being reported to was a bank and financial institution, which makes complete sense, particularly for those that are suffering financial losses. But it does, again, kind of reinforce the fact that most people aren't reporting, that a lot of our official stats, as horrific as they can be at certain times, really only captures a very small proportion of overall victimisation. We asked about the impact of the financial losses for those that had experienced it. Financial hardship, unsurprisingly, is the top, but we do see a range of other impacts, and again, that mirrors other research that I've done, also mirrors the survey results that were presented earlier. I've got a few graphs here that I think are really interesting, just around how people perceive things and around some of the challenges and the tensions and conflicts, I think, that exist with how people process what's happened to them and how they think about the future. So we did ask respondents, thinking about the losses that they've experienced, whether they're more cautious about applying for jobs online in the future. And we do see it's nearly 60% said agreed and 20%, so you've got nearly 80% agree or strongly agree that they are more cautious in what they're applying for jobs in the future, which is a good thing. I mean, that's at least kind of flagging that people perhaps might change their behaviour. And we do see this reflected in the next question, where people say they have changed their behaviour. Whether they've changed it positively or negatively, I guess sometimes, I know from other fraud research, sometimes people change their behaviours and things that they do actually don't help or mitigate the current situation that they're facing. They might be good security practices, but they don't necessarily contribute to that particular example. We asked about whether or not they would apply for jobs online in the future, and this does kind of speak to that deterioration of trust for some people. And again, Anthony and the survey do capture some of this. So, I mean, 65, maybe 70% of people said they would apply for jobs online in the future, that their experience of loss kind of hasn't deterred them. But we do have over 1 in 5, so over 20% said they wouldn't apply for jobs in the future. And we also have probably about 10% who are a little bit unsure. So there is a group of people that after experiencing a loss do, I guess, lose that trust in applying for jobs online, and it does have a fairly detrimental impact. We also asked, and I love, there's 2 questions here. So there's this one where we say, do you think you're likely to experience another loss in the future? And you can see that over 50% say yes. And I'm not sure if this is just a fatalistic, like I'm resigned myself to the fact that I am going to lose more money in the future. And again, this is quite similar. I've asked this question with data breaches. I've asked this question with a number of other different types of fraud. And it's generally kind of 50-50 where people do say, yes, I do think I'm going to experience another loss in the future. But then hopefully, yes, my next slide is when we ask them, do you think you can protect yourself against another loss in the future? And you can see here that nearly 80% of people say they can protect themselves. And I feel again that this is a bit of a tension and a conflict where you've got 50% of the sample saying, I'm going to experience a loss in the future, but you have 80% saying, I think I can protect myself. So I think, yeah, I'm yet to unpack that broadly, not just in terms of recruitment fraud, but just thinking more broadly around how people process their experiences, how they perceive, I guess, their online behaviour and actions, and what can and can't be done to mitigate some of this. We ask people around the target of blame, so who they blame for the financial loss. And you can see here that the highest number of people said that they blamed themselves for the loss. And I mean, I always find this fascinating when you're asking about kind of fraudulent activity, when you're asking who to blame. Very few people actually blame the offender. A lot of people will blame themselves, as we can see here. Or they'll blame organisations, they'll blame, yeah. It's interesting just how people process, I guess, and understand this. We also ask, which I think is important, around whether people considered themselves to be a victim of crime if they had suffered a financial loss. And 133 people did consider themselves a victim of crime, which when you think it was about 200 people, I think, that had suffered a financial loss, that's maybe kind of 65% of people think that they're a victim of crime, whereas the others don't consider themselves that. In terms of the legitimacy of the job advertisements, this is, I think, fascinating that people think that they're primarily responsible for discerning whether the job advertisement is legitimate. Again, there's some challenges around. There's sophistication in terms of how these advertisements are being presented. There are obvious ones that are red flagged, but others are really quite difficult to discern. But our respondents felt that they were responsible, as opposed to the website or the company or kind of anybody else. And then this is my only slide around near misses. So we asked questions about victimisation or about suffering financial losses, and then we had a whole separate module around near misses. So we did have a third of the sample, almost 373 people indicated that they had experienced a near miss. So they were looking for a job, they were halfway through an application, something didn't feel right and they stopped. So they didn't submit the application, they didn't upload all their personal details, etc. And you can see here that the two reasons were they were suspicious about some part of the job advert and they were asked to upload personal information. So I think what this highlights for me is we need to have this discussion about legitimate recruitment practices, the type of information we can expect from people in that initial phase compared to if you make it through to the next round where you're seriously considered to potentially be, I guess, an employee, then you might be required to give more information. But I think still providing photocopies of passports and driver's licenses, regardless of whether it's legitimate, for me is problematic when we again put that with all the data breaches that are happening and the responsibility of companies to keep that safe. So that's it, that's all from me. If you've got questions, happy to take it. If you've got other ideas and insights, happy to have a chat. Thank you.